Hello, my name is Taylor Newman, and I'm here today to convince you that it wasn't a completely insane idea for me to try and write a book my senior year of high school. This year, I'm an FHS 1 student studying creative writing, which basically means that I'm trying to write something that hasn't been written before, but more on that later. A little bit about me. I'm a senior here at Frisco High School. I have a large family. It is me, my father, my stepmom, Courtney, my brother, who's pictured in the bottom right, named Jacob, my two little sisters, Isabel and Logan, who are pictured right next to him, and my dog, Roxy, who cannot be pictured here today because she would need a whole slide to herself. I'm also in the Frisco High School band. During the marching season, I am a saxophone player in the saxophone section, but during the rest of the school year, I'm a bassoon player, which means that not a lot of people know what I do, which is pretty typical for me. The rest of my activities that I enjoy are hanging out with my friends, as pictured in the top two pictures, reading with books, which is also mentioned, and writing, which is what I want to pursue in ISM. My project. So the background that I have, when I was younger, in elementary school to be exact, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. This was a very traumatic incident for everyone in our family, but my mother took it in stride and decided to start a blog online on this website called CaringBridge. For over 2.5 years, my mother posted every single day to update both family, friends, and strangers alike. Because the story was so well known, I decided that I wanted to establish a new medium with it, which is book. So by writing this book, including both my mother's journals and my own thoughts and reflections that come after, I hope to expose her journals, which were empowering to over thousands of people, to a new light. Why did I choose to do this in ISM though? I could have done this project anywhere. I could have done this in the back of my room in a little ball, which is how I spent most of my time studying and working on ISM anyways. But I decided to pursue this project through ISM because ISM teaches me how to build a structure and a plan going into a project. And for something that is as big as this project, I needed to know those skills. So by learning how to establish a daily and weekly schedule, I learned how to pursue this project in a way that was both effective and efficient. I incorporated a lot of research into this project. One of the things that wasn't well known about my mother's journals was that she included a lot of medical terms but did not include a lot of descriptions of said medical terms. So I decided to go on a study to research different cancer terms to both clarify, eliminate, or establish a better definition of what she was talking about. My first research assessment was over chemotherapy versus radiation. Both of those are medicines that attack cancer in the body, but one is a kill-all drug that goes throughout the body, and one is centered on one portion of the body through a laser. Taxotere and Xeloda are different prescription names for these drugs that have chemo inside of them. One is an IV and one is an oral chemo drug, with Taxotere being the one prescribed in the hospital and Xeloda being the one she took daily through pill form. Finally, for that assessment, metastasis. This was something that was referenced a few times, mostly in fear, and so I wanted to establish what this meant. Metastasis means that the cancer has spread from one portion of your body to another, and initially means that the cancer is becoming more progressed and possibly fatal. Every time that my mother mentioned this, it was towards the end of what I ended up describing as my chapter, so that it always kind of leaves the reader on a cliffhanger. So that was important in a literary standpoint. My second research assessment was over mammograms, sonograms, and PET scans, all of which are tests to diagnose cancer and other diseases. Mammograms are the initial tests which highlight where breast cancer might be in the chest region. This is mostly used for women, but also has been helpful with men for diagnosing with breast cancer, which is much less common, but still can occur. Sonograms, or more commonly known as ultrasounds, and essentially help identify if a mass is solid or liquid, which can also help diagnose if it is cancerous or benign. Finally, PET scans are similar to a Christmas tree in that it has the Christmas tree, which is you, there, and lights up only portions of your body that have cancer. The idea is that it will catch any cancer in your body so that when the cancer is finally gone, you will know throughout a PET scan. This was important because it also was, like metastasis, something that I put at the ends of my chapters to have a kind of finality. My third research assessment was over biopsies, synthroid, and steroids. Biopsies are a type of test, but they are more invasive, typically done through needles injected in the arm. And it has occurred when you, when you remove a portion of a tumor from your body and you end up running tests on it to see if it has cancer. This is more effective than the test that I mentioned before because it will tell you 100% what it is and how to attack it. Synthroid is a fake thyroid medicine that my mother used, which wasn't entirely relevant to her cancer diagnosis, but was still mentioned. And finally, steroids, which were used to treat the inflammation in my mother's arm towards the end of her life. My fourth research assessment was over my UNT trip in October. This was an experience that I would not have gotten in any other class, and I was excited to go and research the different types of English classes at this campus. This helped me research more into my career and less into my product, which was something that was very useful if I want to pursue this further. My fifth research assessment went back to the cancer terms with homeopathic medicine. This one was more unique in that it was controversial. Something that isn't well known about homeopathic medicine, first of all, being that it is the idea that like cures like. In homeopathic medicine, much like they treat allergies nowadays by introducing a small amount of, say, if you're allergic to peanuts, a small amount of peanuts to you to help you build up a tolerance to these peanuts, they had the idea to do the same thing with cancer. However, the reason it's so controversial is because cancer cannot be treated through homeopathic medicine. In fact, the only true occurrence that they have that homeopathic medicine did anything for cancer was through what they call the placebo effect, which means that you basically cured yourself of cancer because you thought the medicine was working, not because it actually did. This was interesting from a literary perspective because it drew a nice parallel to my mother's faith in that even if it wasn't true, which I believe it to be, and even if it was misguided, the fact that she believed helped her get through this process in a way that would not have occurred otherwise. This parallel is necessary for me to connect to both secular and religious audiences and will help me grab a larger audience as I attempt to publish this book. The next thing that I did in ISM were interviews. I went on a total of 8 interviews, but I only wrote 5 assessments over the 5 initial interviews. My first interview was with Professor Clay Reynolds at the University of Texas at Dallas. He is a well-established director of creative writing over there, and let me tell you, he knows his stuff. But the first thing he told me when I walked in was, I will not touch this project with a 10-foot pole. Not only was that detrimental to my own mental health, because obviously I want to pursue this project, but it actually ended up motivating me in the end after I got over the initial shock. I realized that although he had published several, in fact dozens of books, he had never written one for himself. He was always trying to get money out of it. And I realized that if that was his goal, then it wouldn't have worked for him. But since it's not mine, it will work for me. My second interview was with Haley Shapley, a freelance writer in the Pacific Northwest. She was an interesting interview because, like one of my earlier assessments, she helped introduce me to the career of writing and not so much my project. She talked to me about the differences between publishing in a publishing house and being a freelance author. She told me that if you love freedom and you like making your own schedule like you do in ISM occasionally, then freelancing is for you because you do end up making more money if you work hard. However, not having a strict structure and a specific assignment can be detrimental if you aren't ambitious. My third interview was actually quite a surprise to me and was with Miss Kami Wickoff, writer and publisher from Brooklyn, New York. Miss Wickoff was visiting one of my family friends while I was babysitting, and because she was only in town for a short amount of time, I decided to have an interview with her on the spot. This meant that not only was I not prepared, but I wasn't even in professional clothes, so obviously my first impression was pretty weak. I attempted through a 2-hour interview to change that perspective from her, and we ended up being so close that we had several follow-up interviews to discuss both of our works. Unfortunately, Miss Wickoff is confined to her Brooklyn abode, which I am envious of, and we continue to talk to this day, but much less frequently. My fourth interview was with Candace Snyder, physical therapist and a friend of my mother. The reason that she had such a special bond with my mother was because she offered free pain relief. That's something that you can't replace with anyone else, not even a doctor, not even a best friend. So their bond was so strong that she, to this day, still remembers my mother and has kept up with me through the past 10 years, even as my mother has passed. I had the opportunity to interview her and ask her about the secret pains that my mother did not disclose in her journals, which was helpful when I was going through an editing so I could have a specific side that I could portray. My fifth and final interview assessment was over my interview with Holly McKay, a friend of my mother. In fact, that doesn't do it justice. They were sisters in every way except literally. Miss McKay, formerly known as Miss Holly Crandall, was my neighbor back when my mother was suffering from breast cancer. She was a woman who would always be there for anyone and for any reason. I've had the opportunity to interview with her multiple times since this day, and even though we became a bit estranged since my mother's death, because obviously it was painful for both of us, we have grown closer, and I hope to ask her to be my mentor in the next couple of weeks. Next, I want to talk about my original work by using pictures, because even though I'm obviously a fan of words, I believe the pictures can obviously tell 1,000 of them. My first initial read-through actually occurred in July. Even though this was before school started, I knew I was going to have to be ambitious with this project or it would not be completed in time. So I started, actually, in that picture on the left at Barnes & Noble, and every day for 12 days I read 20 pages, and probably that took me a good 3 hours each day just to get through. The idea with this was to get a feel for the project, because even though I had read a couple of my mother's posts, I had never read them back to back or as a whole. So that gave me an idea of what I was getting myself into, and honestly, that was necessary before I started school because, wow, was it a lot. The picture on the right depicts the final product, which is actually this black binder here. So the idea with this black binder was to have a physical copy of my mother's journals. As you can see, it is quite thick and very bulky, but as I discovered in my next task, I would have to continue reading and annotating during school. So this became my helpful little trainer because it was such a heavy weight on my back for many, many weeks. So my second read-through was to annotate and to research what was going on in my mother's work. I stumbled across, like I said, many cancer terms. So my second read-through was to establish what those terms were and to go after them by highlighting exactly where they were in my mother's journals. So as you can see on the picture on the left, you can see the exposed binder, and in that notebook paper is a list of all of the drugs, terms, etc. that I had to look up outside of just my research assessment. Finally, you can see on the right with all those post-it notes, which some of which are still there, but most of which were removed to create the outline. The idea behind this was to highlight specific posts which were, well, for the most part, can I say exciting or interesting. So this would eventually lead me to an outline which would create the chapters for my book. The next thing that I had to do after establishing where my chapters would be to start editing and formatting my mother's work. This was a much bigger process than I was initially expecting. As you can see on the picture on the top left, there were 296 pages that I had to go through and edit. And trust me, every single one made it feel like my mother didn't know English. Underneath the page count is the word count. As you can see there, this process, this journal could have been a book all by itself. So if that gives you any idea as to how much work it was, there you have it. Underneath that picture is actually my first example of how things do not always go the way you plan. So this picture establishes an editing process that I had in the beginning of my first chapter. And I tried to split things up and make sure that I wouldn't be editing things that were useless, but really I was just wasting my time. So that just goes to show that even though it looked like I had everything planned out, I promise you I had no clue what I was doing half of the time. And luckily, it ended up working out pretty well. On the right, you can see an example post. This was actually the second post that my mother posted, the first being the initial one saying, hey, this is what I'm doing, blah, 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 and this one actually updating on what she was doing. So as you can see here, each of these posts are designed to be diary formatted so that when they actually go into a book, they're still split up like the original posts. The idea behind this was because there was so much work that she had put into this, and it was already formatted like a day-to-day journal, that there was absolutely no reason to split it up outside of these other than to just be obstinate to what she was trying to accomplish. After I finished editing and formatting, which took me a grand total of 12 weeks, I decided to compile all of the chapters into this binder to become my original work. As you can see here, I had to complete a lot of editing, as you can probably guess. But in the end, even though it was probably, and I do not exaggerate, 350 hours of work, I ended up feeling extremely accomplished because this was the first project that I've ever dedicated myself and created my own schedule to that it required so much work. And honestly, had I attempted like a few of my peers to do it the night before or 2 weeks before, I guarantee that this project would not have been as great of a success as it was. And so I realized that by starting in July, I really had set myself up for success with this project. And honestly, I could not be more amazed at myself and more proud of the project as a whole. Now, where do I go from here? Since these chapters, 10 of them, will end up being the 10 chapters in my book, out of 20, I hope to continue writing this book by including 10 chapters of my own work, which will end up being incorporated with my original work to become my final product. The reason being is that why would I give up my original work to not be incorporated in my final product if I want it to be a book? So the next semester I will be working on both cutting back a little bit on my mother's work a little bit so it makes more concise sense, and also writing my own journals, which will start in September of 2014. Finally, I want to end on my Looking Right quote. Looking Right is the title of my book, and the reason being is explained in this quote. It's from a letter that my dad wrote to my mom, and it says, "I've always told you that the aspects of our lives are lined up, and yes, if we look left, there's a very frightening cancer doing its best to beat us down. But if we look right and count the endless blessings that exist, well, the left isn't so scary anymore." This idea of perspective and absolute faith in the positive things in life is something that I want to encompass both throughout my book and as a theme towards the end of the book. The idea that even in the darkest times there is a bright light to look at is something that my mother fervently believed in, and that I continue to believe to this day. I hope that by the end of this year I will finish this product and will be attending either Ohio State University or University of Texas at Austin for the fall of 2016. Hopefully there my words will continue to amaze others. Thank you.